Welcome to TezTalks Radio. I'm your host, Marissa Trew, and today we are joined by Kaloh, otherwise known as Hugo Santana. Hugo is the founder of the Kaloh newsletter, a top-rated Substack newsletter focused on exploring the intersection between art and technology, as well as Kaloh's podcast. He's also the founder of The Blind Gallery, a next-generation art collecting experience powered by digital objects and blockchain technology. So, hi, Hugo. It's been a long time coming, but welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Doing great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Marissa. And yeah, very happy to be here.
So, as usual, we will begin where we always do on TezTalks Radio, and that is with your personal story. So, can you please tell me about the road that led, you up to the world of Web3 and blockchain art?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with my background. I'm a computer scientist and data scientist. So I work around 8 years in the tech industry. And during my time working as a software developer and data scientist, I was always interested in the blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. So I was kind of an spectator. I was reading the news, reading the technology, and at some point in 2020, I discovered smart contracts and NFTs, right? So towards the end of 2020, early 2021, and that's when I got this idea of actually start to do something, right? To do something practical and experiment a bit. And I bought some Ethereum, some Ethers, and started to, buy NFTs and play around, understand how you could develop smart contracts. And during those days, I found it very hard to find information on what was happening, right? Especially with NFTs. So it felt like very disorganized and many things were happening, but you couldn't find like reliable sources, right, of information. And I always liked to write, more as a hobby. And when I was working, I used to write a lot of summaries and different things about work. And Substack, that platform, I was subscribed to a couple of newsletters. So it felt like a good idea to, start my own publication and just share what I was learning. And so the first 3 to 5 months, I was writing a little bit about everything, right? About crypto, NFTs, smart contracts, but there wasn't like a clear direction. And when I found Tezos, I actually found Tezos and Hicket and started to, write about art, about crypto art. And I think I found a solid audience of like readers and collectors, artists that were very interested in this topic. And I just kept writing about that. And eventually I found generative art, which is art made with code, um, and also found FX hash on Tezos. And that really clicked because of my background. I understood like the complexities of making art with code and found it really special, um, and focused on that. So my publication kind of 80% was about generative art from different angles. It could be about collecting, could be about the complexities behind the collections, also about the artists. I started to do interviews, started to do market analysis, where I kind of evaluated the different collections, how many people were collecting, movements in the price market. Um, but again, it was more to inform, right? To inform people to understand what was happening, right? What were the new trends? Um, and that community started to grow. I started to get more subscribers and launch a premium community, where people could subscribe, with a monthly fee, which gave them access to additional content and also my private Discord server. And that was, I believe, early 2022. And that really, got me excited that I had this community of enthusiasts, right, into the ecosystem, both as creators and also collectors. And that's, I think, the origins of Kaloh's newsletter. And So at the same time, I would say I launched 2022, May 2022, I created the Blind Gallery, which is a digital gallery as you described. And I was collaborating with different artists, crypto artists, on different group shows. There were different kind of mediums. We have done shows with generative art, but also AI art. We collaborated with platforms like FXHash and Object.com. And I think what's interesting about the Blind Gallery, or what's interesting about it, is that it's not about the hype of the name. So Blind comes because we showcase art, we work with artists, but we don't reveal the names of the participating artists until the end of the experience. So that really attracted a group of people that were really in for the art and learning and discovering new creators. And also artists found the concept neat. They wanted to participate um, as something very different, right, from the typical releases that were based on the names of the artist. And that's the original story of a newsletter and the Blind Gallery.
So you mentioned at the beginning that the newsletter started out as your way of documenting what you were learning and also having some kind of medium that you could share those learnings with other people. And given your computer science background, ahead of you venturing into the world of generative art, you sort of found yourself with this affinity for digital art overall. Was that affinity always there and this intersection was just the perfect opportunity for you to explore it? Or was this a new interest that sort of developed as you learned more and more about, the Web3 world of creators?
Yeah, I think so. To be honest, um, if you think about it, before I delved into Web3, I didn't have a strong art background, right? So I didn't have any studies in art. I did read from time to time history and like to visit museums, but it's not something that I thought like professionally, right? Like something that I would do professionally. Um, but I think once you combine technology with art, is very different, at least to me, because I like to be early into this new wave, this new kind of revolution where there were many artists that were starting their path in this new ecosystem, and the combination with the technology as a distribution, but also as a way of inspiration, really clicked to me. So it was a way to, um, maybe before that, it's also I've been a collector. So I did was a collector since I was a kid. I was collecting different kind of things, like sports cards and the famous World Cup album where you collect the different stickers from the players. So I've been a collector for a while, but not necessarily an art collector, right? But the idea of having your portfolio that you could collect and look at it digitally, and it didn't necessarily you had to need a lot of space or storage to keep these kind of things. That also I found interesting in the idea of your digital identity, where actually everything that you were doing in the blockchain, people could look at that, and it in a ways it's like your personality, right, in the digital world. So those things, in a way, were something that I had. If you look at my hobbies, somewhere there, but it all clicked with crypto art. It was more like, it also felt really casual. Again, I was working in the tech industry, and it was like corporate and very serious, right? Like if you had to do a conference or a talk or a presentation, you couldn't make any mistakes. But this space felt very very casual and natural. So my articles, I was not afraid if I wrote something down that was not perfect, right? It was like, at the end, the people consuming it are very open minded, and they have a free mind, very curious people. So it was a good space to, open up and don't take. I think people don't take themselves too seriously in this space, and that helped me a bit to, keep releasing stuff and felt like a natural home. Yeah.
Okay, so because it was very early on in the industry, you felt like you could explore all of this and learn all of this as it was starting to take shape, rather than sort of feel like there was this barrier to entry, or you needed to learn everything ahead of participating. You could kind of see this unfold in real time, which I think is a great way to look at it. And going back to what you were mentioning about the blind gallery and the concept of working with artists who, to the potential collectors, are completely anonymous right up until the very end. I think it also stems back to, this casual culture of, Hic et Nunc, and the fact that there was this whole community of incredibly talented artists that nobody had really heard of before. So it's sort of taking the pretense out of the art world and kind of trying to display talent in its rawest form. Do I have that right? Is like the concept or what you were attempting to achieve through the blind gallery?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And also, I think one thing that we don't mention a lot is the fact that you can connect a lot of people, right, in this space, worldwide, from different parts of the world, at different ages, at different stages in their life. And that was something that really inspired me when I saw people from all around the world, either as artists or as collectors, and collaborating with artists from South America, Asia, US and Europe, and Australia, and so all these parts of the world, and we could set up group shows in a short amount of time, let's say 2 to 3 months, and actually doing that in a physical world would have been really really complicated. And yeah, but you describe it really really well. Yeah.
So, as someone who's also spread across multiple art communities within the Web3 space, firstly, what was it about Tezos in particular that stuck out to you, that kind of gave you this affinity for this community? Because Tezos, particularly during the most recent bull market, was sort of seen as the art epicenter of this Web3 universe. And as creator communities are sort of existing across chain, what are some of the patterns that you're starting to see, or the trends that you're starting to notice across these different communities?
Yeah, I think this has had multiple, let's say, elements that you couldn't find in other communities. So first of all, is kind of the vibe. It feels like an underground vibe. There were different kind of artists that they were there just experimenting, and releasing all kinds of work. And so it was great to just to look around. You could find like high diversity of artists and different kind of artworks. So also in terms of the platforms, there were like very specific things. Like you mentioned Hicket Nunc, which was a pioneer. It was a very underground platform. The UI, it's very people love it or hate it, and it also helped with the fact that it was cheap. To be honest, like the gas prices were very very low, and you didn't need like a lot of money just to collect art. And I think that was a big factor because I could collect maybe 3 4 pieces on Ethereum at the time, but on Hicket or on Tezos, I could collect hundreds, right? And I think it attracted people that weren't necessarily in to make money, and more with a curious mindset. And eventually, more marketplaces and communities developed out of that, like FXHash and Object.com, which had very very specific communities. Like their let's say people were there for very specific things. In the case of FXHash, for open generative art, and you could see like the same thing repeating, right? You saw artists that could practice, that could create their art at affordable prices, and at the same time you could see collectors that were there, trying to discover good art, but also supporting artists. So that was, yeah, kind of, you couldn't find that in other communities outside of Tezos at the time. And I think that was the right place first for writing, right, to find interesting content. It gave me like a lot of topics to write about, and also with the blind gallery felt like the right place to launch this sort of digital gallery, which was based on those premises of innovation, curiosity, putting art first.
So then when you look more broadly at the industry over the last couple of years, I mean 2022, 2023, it was a very tough time for the Web3
Mm.
industry. A lot of the art collecting, a lot of the trading, whether it was speculative or whether it was based on the talent of the artist, sort of fell quiet. So during that time, what were sort of the thoughts that ran through your head? As someone who caught the early wave of Hic et Nunc and basically the evolution of Tezos's art marketplaces, and then the rise of FX Hash as a dominant name in the generative art space. To be marked by such a sharp contrast when the market turned, what was running through your head at the time? How did you feel?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I guess there were many thoughts, and it really evolves over time. Um, so first, I think if we think about the positive side, is that a lot of people are still engaging, right, and are around, even if selling art or volume is way lower than what it used to be. So that what I've seen is that innovation hasn't stopped. There are many builders, there are many creators still around experimenting with different things. So technology-wise, the space is much more mature. So in a way, volume and as you said, like interest or collecting interest is down, but technology is much more powerful these days, and there are many more builders than before. You can see that in terms of crypto wallets and protocols evolution and the amount of founders that are in the space. So that's quite good. Also, platforms have much like the UI and UX and the features are much better. Um, Also, what I notice is that the space is much more fragmented in a way. So that's good and bad. So fragmented because there are many more communities, there are many more marketplaces, there are many more galleries, there are um, communities, so many more places or rooms to hang out, and that's good if we think about galleries and marketplaces, because that means that they need to do a better job, right, to attract the attention of collectors and artists. That's
Mhm.
great. On the other side, for collectors and consumers, could be tricky, right? Because in the past was hard to catch up with everything, but now it's even harder because there are many more places that you have to look at. So again, that's good and bad in their own ways. So for me as let's say community creator or as the founder of the Blind Gallery, I kind of again had positive thoughts and negative thoughts at time, but I think that's what led me to something that I haven't mentioned. But I believe that there are cycles, right? So if we look at the story of crypto, coins go up and down, but there are clear cycles throughout the last 10 years. And I wasn't really a believer in that, on the cycles theory. I thought that was just something that happened, and that doesn't necessarily mean it will continue, right? Or that we'll see other cycles. But now that I see that the technology keeps evolving and that there are people that are still here, artists are still creating art, creators are putting, products out there. It feels that things are getting more mature, and I do believe there will be another cycle, and that's again good and bad, right? Because in the last cycle we had many things that could have been done in a better way, but at the same time, there will be people entering the space that will need better guidance than before. I think we can improve um, in terms of explaining what is the blockchain, what things you can do, what is art, what can you collect, what are NFTs. And now there are more specific things. So if you like to invest, there are places to invest. If you like to develop and create, there are places to do that. If you like art, there are places for that. And then there are different kind of art, art mediums or art forms, and there are very niche platforms and communities for every case. The same for gaming. If you like to create games, if you like to play games, so that's what led me to this idea of the an academy, right, to support people getting into the space. And I think it's something that um, can be built over time. And once we get to that point that there is demand for new content, for better explanations, to better guidance, we should have a strong educational platform that support those people, right? So that's why we are launching the Academy by Blind Gallery, and we are starting with blockchain art as a way to introduce newcomers to the space in a more, with the right guidance and the right people to teach them what they hopefully they want to understand.
I think you make a really interesting point because when you talk about the cyclical nature of the market, essentially every single time you have this rush of enthusiasm, and then when the tide runs out, you see sort of how little there really was that was propping up, I
Hmm.
guess, the Web3 industry or the blockchain space. But then with every cycle and with every wash of the new tide, when it washes back out again, there seems to be a little bit more of an ecosystem that's left behind. So while originally it was a little bit bare and it gave people this sense of skepticism of, did I just buy into a vision without really there being any substance to support it, by the next cycle there was, little seedlings of ideas, and from what started as, this revolutionary financial idea, now we've got, like as you said, this art space, we've got gaming, we've got institutional investment happening, we've got a whole diversity of different projects that are really testing the boundaries of what this
Hmm.
technology can do, and how it might pave the way for the new internet. But what's
Hmm.
interesting about the principle of your academy is that while I'm sure you can teach a lot of the fundamentals, how do you make sure that the academy is flexible enough? Because again, the next cycle is going to give us so many more learnings that mean that something we've learned in the past may no longer be relevant. So how do we
Hmm.
anticipate that?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point, and that's why, I mean, that's the topic of like evergreen content, right? That it's always valuable, and it doesn't matter if you read it today or if you read it in maybe 2 3 years, it's still relevant. And then there are things like news and trends that maybe change from week to 1 week to another. Um, so I think that's why focusing on one area like art, it's important because there are fundamental concepts like how does an artist, like creating your profile as an artist and building your portfolio, and how to market your art, and how to collaborate with platforms and curators, right? So and maybe the different tooling that there is out there from artists, which could change, but to have, the starting point, I think that could be something that is relevant in 2 to 3 years. At the same time, we could create more like cohort-based initiatives, like webinars or workshops that are maybe a one-time thing, and it's run by an expert in a very specific something that is happening right now. Um, and so we can have like different kind of content, right? Like evergreen and content that is relevant to what's happening today. But it's a challenge, and it's tricky. I was looking at the articles I've written over the past 2 years, and I will say 70 80% is probably not relevant because I've been covering a lot of trends and news. So it's a challenge, and I think it's a one of it happens because the space moves so fast, right? So um, it's not good or bad. It's just the
Mm.
way it is, but it means that there is innovation happening, and I think that's positive at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of while we can follow trends, the fundamentals of this space are still sort of up for debate. So, no one can be blamed for not having absolute confidence and certainty of what's going to stick and what's going to evolve. And I mean, just take the art world as an example. The original conception or perception of NFTs within the art space was it was completely anti. There was a huge resistance against incorporating this sort of technology, and now we're seeing, you know, institutions like Sotheby's, MoMA, like major names start to participate in
Yeah,
meaningful ways. They're not just dabbling and experimenting with it to see how it goes. They are heavily investing into these arenas. So it does pave the way for this idea that like this is here to stay. There is a fundamental in there. We just need to all collectively agree on what it's going to be.
yeah.
Um, but as we see the market start to recover, how do you see the evolution of this space, in the what's hopefully a bull market ahead? How do you think it's going to change, given what you've understood of the trends of the past and how they're kind of casting a vision of what's to come?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to answer that, but I do feel like there are a few things that can happen. One is in terms of creators, and creators could be artists, could be product founders, any kind of creator that had a vision and had discipline, and kind of didn't give up, right? And had a long-term mission, a long-term view. I think those will be very relevant if there is a new cycle, right? So if you look at artists that maybe haven't had like crazy amount of sales, but they have a vision and they have been developing their craft and their audience, and they continue to produce creative work. Those could be in a good spot, right, to be the next generation of established names. Same for founders in the space and creators. If you had a product that maybe was doing okay, but you kept improving it and you kept, learning what people want, and eventually the product is pretty good. If you kept developing over the past 2 years, then those will be in a great position to obtain new users. So in general, I guess those that were thinking long term, so that they had a vision of 5 to 10 years instead of just 3 months or 6 months or the next release, those should be in a great spot. And then there is again, since the technology moves so fast, I've seen a few trends, like decentralized social networks. I think those are going to be very, very powerful. There are protocols out there that are doing an amazing job, and they are really fostering decentralization, and they easily combine NFTs, and what I was mentioned earlier about the digital identity, and making it very easy to, create services that are very digital, and in a smooth way. Those I think are going to be very interesting because in the past, we saw how everything ran on Twitter, and it was maybe a little bit chaotic, and it was not. I mean, there were good things and bad things happening there as well. But I feel like now we'll have a native platforms for blockchain and Web3, and will make things much better for newcomers, right? It will be much easier for them to get up to speed and find their communities. Um, so that's another trend that I think it's going to be interesting. So decentralized social, and in terms of art, I think people learn, right, from what happened, and now they both collectors and artists, they understand that, okay, this is it's kind of a hobby for collectors, and for artists they understand that it's not about doing a huge drop and making a lot of money quickly. It's more about making it sustainable, right, and building an audience. And I feel like if there is a new cycle, those artists and those creators are the ones that will be in the right position, and new artists and new creators will follow that example, hopefully, and people will be able to identify, right, like what's interesting and what's not based on that. And I think we cannot. There will be there always be a speculation, right? And that's part of what moves the whole crypto scene. But I believe that more communities and places for meaningful stuff will be there will be more of those in the next cycle. Yeah.
So I guess in a way, as this technology becomes more and more intuitive, as in the platforms that are being built are a lot more, I guess, a lot friendlier to the users that they're ultimately trying to target. It sort of invites people to start participating more naturally, as you were saying right at the very beginning of our conversation, this sort of casual interaction with this space where it didn't feel like the on-ramps and the off-ramps were this terrifying exercise of potentially losing all of your wealth.
Yeah.
Um, and as an evolution of that, this is kind of going to normalize, like in a way that, yes, there is some level of volatility that some people have definitely fallen in love with, but when it can kind of hit this steady calm is when we're really going to see people meaningfully engage with the technology. Perhaps this is where, the layer one chain sort of falls to the background, becomes more of the infrastructure layer, and the applications really take center
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah.
And I think it's through all these exercises. It may not happen within the next 12 months. It might take a little bit longer, but as you've said, the technology is moving faster and faster. So with that in mind, is there one particular project or one particular promise that you kind of got your eye on and you really can't wait for it to become a reality?
I mean, I think there are multiple things. So I've read about Etherlink from Tezos, right? And I think that's a very interesting proposition. I still would like to see it in action, but I do think for a developer standpoint, it brings a lot of functionality. So I'm very interested in that. Then again on the decentralized social, I've been so during the last 3 years, I've been very active on Twitter, and it's been a great, like a very important pillar to grow my audience and my Substack. But now I see how there are tools that are kind of replacing these tools, the Web2 tools. So in terms of Twitter, it could be a Farcaster protocol. It's again very interesting. I've been spending a lot of time there. And there are other tools like newsletters, for example. There is Paragraph. It's a great tool, on-chain newsletter, so you can subscribe with your wallet and people can mint your articles. And so there are these sort of features that on different products that adapt to the Web3 world. And I think for those that are in the space, make things more interesting, or kind of everything starts to click. And then we see these products connecting to each other, right? So for example, in Parkcaster, if you comment, if somebody posts a link from an article or paragraph, and somebody comments, you can see it in the article, right? So if somebody else goes to the article, they will see the comments that came from Farcaster. And that's just one example, but I believe that over the next year, all these applications will be connected. And the same for the blind gallery, for example. We could, if there is a course and there is some discussion on a social network, people could see the discussion about that course directly in the blind gallery, and it would be all integrated, right? So also for the art and maybe the NFT, has some sort of interaction with other products. So I think it's a bit confusing what I'm saying, but in general, I feel like there will be more integration for everything blockchain, and it should be much easier or the experience should be much better for everyone, in not too far away, to be honest.
Right. So it's this principle of decentralization, which is, the core tenet of this entire industry, without it being fragmented. So
Hmm.
there's a cohesion there that even though, it's like in the way that the internet as we now know it is this vast universe where you can do pretty much anything on it. The connectivity between the different platforms can sometimes leave a lot to be desired. So in this Web3 universe, we're seeing this seamless blend of how all of these pieces fit together and cooperate with one another rather than sort of being just a million different shards of glass making one big mosaic. It's actually creating a cohesive image for everyone to use.
Right, right. Because if I look at my friends, my girlfriend, for example, she likes art and she likes I don't know, she likes to read science fiction, for example, but she doesn't care about blockchain technology, to be honest. So she doesn't care if something is on Solana or on Tezos. For her, it's more about the how the UI UX feels and how she could get that information in her Kindle, or she
Mhm.
could have a place to see all the art she collected, for example. And that's for her is irrelevant. She will not go into the details. So okay, this is in in L2 blockchain, or this is on Tezos. She's more into the front of it, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like probably 90% of the population, 95% of the population in the world think like that, right? It's more for we are like the early adopters, and we care about the different coins and the different interactions and how everything works behind on the back. But most people don't care about those things. It's about the use cases, right? And
Mhm.
I feel like thanks to decentralization and the way how these products are being built, eventually the experience will be much better for normies, and they will focus on the use cases and what they actually find interesting, and not so much on the technology.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most uh, succinct explanation of what we're seeing happen in this space is all of the things I'm going to say in the last 3 to 5 years that this industry has considered of the utmost importance. It's funny to think that to the end user, it's ultimately not going to matter at all. Like all of these different building blocks are so crucial to
Hmm.
making sure this grand idea works. But then once it is successful, the success will be told by the fact that no one actually understands that that's all happening in the back end.
Yeah,
Like this is a core technology that needs to be developed, and it's getting increasingly sophisticated. So it's about understanding that when we host these conversations, there's a lot of content here that just simply isn't relevant to the
yeah,
people that we're ultimately trying to bring into the space. And so
yeah.
mediums like art are going to be that stepping stone. Art, culture, experience, exactly as you were saying, are going to be the way that people fall in love with this environment, because they don't have to be confused by terminology like a smart contract, NFT, an optimistic
Mm,
rollup, or any of that.
yeah. It's a. I think what still matters is like the concept of digital ownership, and that's something that is big part of everything we're doing in the space. But normies still don't get that idea that they can own things in the internet. And but again, to understand that, they don't need to understand all the technologies behind it. They just need to
Mhm.
understand there is a place where they can see all their objects, and if they want, they can sell it. But people can see that they own those things, and eventually, it's a way to display their personality, right? Either if they like art, they maybe the places they have been,
Mhm.
um, all these things. And yeah, following up on that topic, like Facebook, for example, the case of Facebook, the case of Twitter. Again, I mean, people weren't talking about when they were using Facebook, when it became popular, they weren't talking about the algorithms behind Facebook, all the technologies behind Facebook, and they implemented plenty of new technologies to make that social network work. But nobody, I was using Facebook to connect with my friends, not because they had this new database that was super fast.
Mhm.
Nobody cared about those things. And I feel like the same will happen in Web3. We're still so early that we focus so much on the technology because that's where the innovation is happening. But eventually, the innovation will come once the technology is more mature, and the innovation will come more in the experiences. And I
Mhm.
think we aren't that far away from that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's the case where when we look at Web 2, experience was sort of first and foremost. It was the first thing you encountered. Like I think the experience was already built in on a fairly basic but still good enough level for the everyday normie, as you put it, to interact with. And then it just got increasingly more sophisticated the more data they gleaned about the way people like to engage online.
Mm.
While in the Web3 space, because I think there's so much more ideology that underpinned it, it became harder to separate the conversation between why this technology has to be the way that it is and the impact that we're ultimately trying to create. So, as you said, this principle of digital ownership, when we look at the gaming space in particular, we look at in-game economies and the ability for players to transact within game rather than, having to do it out of game, because those sorts of economies already existed offline.
Yeah.
But building them into the infrastructure of the game was this revolutionary idea because it was happening anyway.
Yeah.
So I think we're trying to reconcile ideas that have always made sense but just never really felt tangible in a digital environment. And I think it's
Yeah.
one of those things where, fortunately or unfortunately, older generations, and I'm going to say older as in millennial up, are going to find it harder than Gen Z, Gen Alpha are going to find it, just because their digital environments are so much more immersive than ours ever were. So
Yeah.
the principle of value is clearer in a way that it was never really positioned to us. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I was reading a report from Roblox, this big gaming company, and it said something like new generations are willing to pay more for the clothes and the skins
Mm.
their avatars wear than the ones what they pay for their clothes in real life. So that's really shocking. I couldn't believe it because it was incredible to see that or new generations are they value digital ownership, they value digital items much more than physical items. And they haven't even used the decentralization, to be honest. They haven't used blockchain yet, which are the tools that power that possibility at the scale. So yeah, I agree. It's I think probably it will be much more natural to onboard the new generations. They will be onboarded, and I don't like the word onboarded, but they will be using these tools and they will be more open to them than
Mhm.
the older generations. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is also a little bit ironic given we pay for so many online services. We pay for cloud services. We buy
Mm.
applications to make sure that, we subscribe to Spotify, Netflix, and so on,
Yeah.
and pay monthly. But the concept of us not owning any of that doesn't really
Mm.
land, which is such an
Yeah.
interesting exercise because we are so used to digital economies. We participate in them every day, but we are not used to owning any bit of that. And that seems to be like the mental block
Yeah.
behind why this is such an uphill battle and convincing people why, Web3 or digital ownership is something worth pursuing at the end of
Mm.
the day. So I think
Right.
it's a very interesting future that we're painting for ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And then once those companies, those products from the Web2 are really like they start to lose traffic or users to these new tools that actually grant ownership to people, they either will try to implement those digital ownership features, or they will just not survive. And I think we aren't far away from seeing like a big Web2 company losing market share or users to a Web3 company that does the same, but with the ownership included, right? Like the digital ownership included in
Hmm. Well, Hugo, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm very sensitive about time. So before I let you go, can you please share with our audience where they can find your newsletter and how they can follow on all of the learnings that you have to share, as well as the blind gallery?
Yeah, yeah. So the newsletter is quite easy. It's also the podcast also runs on the same service. It's Substack. It's Kaloh, Kaloh.xyz. The blind gallery is blindgallery.xyz. That's the art uh, part of the blind gallery, and we are releasing the academy at the same domain. So Blind Gallery, if you want to access it directly, it's academy.blindgallery.xyz.
Perfect. Well, Hugo, thank you so much for your perspectives. I think it was extremely enlightening because not only did we sort of explore the art world and how that's matured within the Web3 space, but we've also kind of explored the bigger ideas that are underpinning this industry and getting a clearer sense of what it's really going to take to accomplish that vision in the near future. So thank you so much.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for having me and for the interesting questions. And yeah, thanks so much, Marissa.
Pleasure.